On an IG live chat, Giannis was asked which player he thinks in the NBA is hardest to guard. Giannis took a long time to think about it, then finally said very quickly and almost quietly, James Harden, without any explanation. And obviously, Giannis has taken two recent shots at James Harden, the first time taking, as you remember, Kemba Walker over James Harden in the All-Star draft, and then saying, I want somebody that's going to pass the basketball. And then he said after that All-Star game that his team, Giannis's team, was looking to pass the ball to whichever player James Harden was guarding. So, Shannon Sharpe, how do you explain that Giannis suddenly picked James as hardest to guard?
Well, you're trying to play nice now. You're trying to backtrack a little bit, but you said what you said. Skip, I'm surprised he didn't say, well, James Harden is the toughest to guard because he doesn't play defense or pass the ball, so he has all that energy for offense. But I noticed how he didn't backtrack, Skip, when he said James Harden doesn't pass the ball. He didn't backtrack when he said, yeah, we were trying to pass the ball to whomever James Harden was guarding. He ain't say anything about that. He might be trying to say the beef is over with what he said, but not for James Harden. Skip, these are very, very prideful men, and they pride in, yes, and some players are better on one end than the other. But when you take a swipe at him, basically you said, you are all offense. You can't do anything else. How do you think that man is going to respond? He made it abundantly clear. He's like, okay, I didn't see what was the laugh at? Kemba, me? I'm an MVP. Been in the top 2, 3 voting MVP the last 3 or 4 years. And you tell me, oh, it was a tough decision taking Kemba over me? James made it abundantly clear. He didn't see what the joke, he didn't see the humor in that statement that Giannis had made.
Okay, so remember, James did finally, via Rachel Nichols, fire back at Giannis because he said, I wish I could be 7 feet tall and just dunk. That takes no skill at all. And it seems like once James fired back at Giannis, that Giannis sort of folded his tent and went home. And when I watched this, the clip of this IG Live, and he finally said, James Harden is the hardest to guard, it felt like he was wimping out. It felt like he was backing off. It felt like he was backing down. And this is what I don't like about Giannis. Now, Shannon, allow me to add some context and perspective here. I do have some sympathy for players who grow up in other countries, this case Greece, and then come to our country to play professional basketball because maybe they never feel quite comfortable with the media. Not that Giannis doesn't speak very good English, because he does, but maybe you don't feel quite that comfortable getting in some kind of a spat with an established star like James Harden. I don't know. Maybe he felt like he needed to back down because he's not from America and he's taking on a player who's almost becoming iconic because he's revolutionizing the way offensive basketball is played. But this is what I don't love about Giannis. You know, I don't love it that he doesn't seem to have that tough guy backbone that when he really gets pushed to the brink, he fights back. He didn't fight back in the Eastern Conference Finals last year against Toronto, and he didn't hold his ground on this one. Your thoughts?
Right. Yeah, well, Skip, here's the thing. Skip, you remember, what was it, the World Classic when Brazil beat Greece? And the guy's like, I got this 40-year-old guy out here kicking this young, you know what. Skip,
he did.
It doesn't matter where you're from. You know what's a slight. You know when you take shots at someone. And how did he think James Harden? Skip, James Harden's an MVP. And you basically took a guy, Kemba's a fine player, but he's not James Harden. And to say James Harden is the hardest to guard. Skip, what to go out on a limb. You're talking about a guy that shoots over 80% from the free throw line. And he's shooting about 13 to 15 free throws a night. He has the step back three that's unguardable. And you go out on a limb. Yeah. Don't play nice now.
No, I agree with you. So let's continue up next in the NBA because let's talk about a Golden State team that could have the first overall pick in the draft and is indicating it has no use for LaMelo Ball. Stay with us. Finals of the fan poll on ESPN to choose the greatest college basketball player ever. And remember, Magic Johnson made it to the Final Four of that fan poll. So this got us thinking about the most watched basketball game ever. And that was obviously the 1979 NCAA championship game in Salt Lake City. I was there. I covered that game that night. Magic versus Bird. That was the game that everybody said put college basketball and certainly the Final Four on the national map. So, Shannon Sharpe, I ask you, why was that game the highest rated game ever in the history of basketball?
Skip, I believe there were two elements at play here. You remember, Skip, back then, there was not Amazon, there was not Hulu, there was not a whole lot to watch. You had ABC, you had CBS, and you had NBC. That was it. So all these other channels, there was no social media. There was not a whole lot for you to do. But also, Skip, remember, in the 70s, there was still this element of a racial. You had, as you mentioned, the Great White Hope against Magic Johnson. Now, Skip, a whole lot of people didn't know about Larry Bird because back then, it's not like it is now. You live in Georgia, you can see UCLA, you can see all these other games. But back then, games were regional. You only got a chance to see Larry Bird once they got to what we know now is March Madness. So there's not a whole lot of people that knew about Larry Bird or Magic Johnson. But when we finally get here, Skip, I remember asking myself, I'm like, how did he get the name Magic? I know his mom ain't named him. I'm asking myself, why his name, why his name Magic? I didn't know because he could do things with the basketball people hadn't seen before. It seemed like he was a magician. That's how he got the name. So I'm like, okay. And I'm looking at Bird and Magic. And as you mentioned, Skip, it's always been that. From when Jack Johnson was the heavyweight title champ and he's fighting these, as we call them, Great White Hope, you had these sides pitted. Whether it be Joe Louis fighting, I think it was Max Smelling back then. So you've always had one side or the other, and you had right on the edge of your seat. Skip, I don't think watching that game, and I remember watching it from start to finish, that I ever think this game would do this or it would mean this. I didn't, Skip. I did not. The first national championship game I can remember watching was '77, was Marquette and UNC. But I'm like, okay, Final Four, okay, Bird and Magic. Now, I don't remember, Skip, it being billed like this because it was Bird, Magic. I remember when Kentucky beat Duke the year before. Kyle Macy, Jack Gibbons, I think Rick Roby was on that roster, Skip. They didn't talk about it like this. The guys that were in that game, they didn't talk like they talked about Bird Magic. And I'm not mistaken, Skip, wasn't that game on NBC? I could be wrong, but I think it was NBC. It might have been CBS. But Skip, I don't remember the previous games or even the games right after that being talked about like this game. And it wasn't until maybe 10, 15 years later that I realized that I had actually watched something special. But when you got, Skip, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen a white ball player that's been like Larry Bird. We never. And I don't know if we'll ever see it again. Forget, foreign born or American born. We've never seen anything close to American born. We compare them to say Luka has some Bird in him. He might be the closest thing. But we haven't seen an American born white player even come close to Larry. And so, Skip, I think that there's the racial element. And I think the mere fact, Skip, there was not a whole lot going on. So what else were you going to watch? And you remember, Skip, when you got shows back then that were good, I remember MASH and I remember Dallas and Dynasty. Skip, those shows ran for 10, 15 years and they would pull 10, 15, 20 million fans a week because that was it. What else you were going to
do? Yeah, good point. Okay, I start with the final irony to this whole discussion, which was, again, I was there that night, and Shannon, the game was a dud. The game was basically a mismatch and was never close. So the final score was 75-64, but the halftime score was 37-28, a 9-point game. And it never felt like it was any closer than a 9 or a 10-point game. And Bird ran out of gas. He was playing, he's playing every game every night. And he did okay at 19 and 13, but shot only 7 of 21 from the floor. Magic was very good. He was 24-7 and 5 assists. But Gregory Kelser, who was going to be a pretty good NBA player himself, he kind of stole the show with 19, 8, and 9. Nobody remembers that. But the only thing anybody remembers is the buildup and the crescendo that was this game. And I'll be the first to tell you, I have a hard time of saying this put college basketball on my map because it did not. Shannon, I was a huge college basketball fan already. I was a Pistol Pete Maravich fan. I had the honor and the privilege of seeing Pistol Pete play twice, once at Vanderbilt and once in Oklahoma City at what was called the all-college tournament was played at Christmas time. So to me, college basketball was a huge thing already. And then I was having